I think what sets him apart from other actors is the diversity within his career, because he started out in a kind of golden age of British radio in the late 40s, early 50s, and was extremely famous in Britain all through the 50s because of the Goon show. And even within that show, he created a gallery of, you know, a half a dozen major recurring crazy characters that worked in a radio kind of way. It was a very experimental and very funny and bizarre piece of stuff. And then once the film career started, I would say, you know, from the mid-50s to the mid-60s when he was working with Stanley Kubrick, there's an amazing number of films in there where he just nailed being the greatest chameleon-like character actor you'd ever see. And the script is quite an extraordinary piece of writing, because rather than... It's not called the Peter Sellers story, it's the life and death of Peter Sellers, and the writers have managed to create like a biopic, but it's not a biopic, and they've written it in such a way that it might be, if Peter Sellers made a film of his life, it would be like a Peter Sellers movie. So all of the extraordinary ups and downs that he had in terms of marriages, relationships, you know, professional anxieties, all of that's treated somehow in a comic way, and sometimes in a very poignant way, and sometimes in a very strange stylistic way. The film is almost shot the way that the different eras of his life might have had films made. So the scenes that are happening in Britain in the 50s are very
tus tráilers, visita mi canal.
Kind of drab and domestic, and once he hits celebrity and stardom, they become very glossy, and they take on the style of that era. Barbara Barclay is my voice coach, and we'd met on Shakespeare in Love, and at the time we were working together on Pirates of the Caribbean, and I had some chunks of time off during that when I knew that I was going to do the role. So we knew we had some run-up time, so we decided not to make any definite decisions. We just looked at as many of the films as we could. So we just kind of soaked all that up and started to talk about the background that he had, because both his parents were in British variety, and that was a big part of his childhood, being dragged around the country, living with showbiz parents. And I think in some ways that isolated him as a child, and he became very focused on mimicking people, and by the time he was like 14 or 15, he was apparently an extraordinary, you know, almost forensic kind of vocal mimic of people around him and friends, and he'd see lots of weird sort of British music hall types. That was the world that he grew up in. I sort of decided I would be, you know, Geoffrey Rush as Peter Sellers in The Life and Death of Peter Sellers. That was the way I kind of had to mentally frame the idea, because with this extraordinary new makeup technique using silicone pieces, which is basically like, particularly when I had to put weight on to look chubbier in my 30s and hide the fact that I'm 50s. It was like having, you know, 7 pieces of congealed veal spirit gum to my face, and then it would all get blended in, and you'd go, oh, it looks like you, and you put on weight. So we tried to keep it that, you know, we wanted to affect a certain profile with the look of his nose and, you know, the nature of his hair and the various transformations that he went through in his life, but not lose me being seen in that, you know, because with these makeup techniques you could actually just put a complete Peter Sellers rubber head on, and then you sort of go, well, why would you want to do that?
I think there's a certain amount of responsibility that you always feel in playing somebody, because it is somebody's life, and you can never forget that. But then also as an artist, I think you have to always remember that there's always a greater truth. And in telling a story, it's never going to be exactly somebody's life, verbatim. And I think once you realize that and just try and tell the story as best as you can, it becomes a little bit easier. And Peter Sellers was such an, I think, interesting human being. I mean, his films and his life was kind of like one of his films. I mean, I think he had a very strange way of seeing things, and the movies is very aware of that. I thought that it was really well written, and also just it felt very honest as to who he really was. Not that I knew him personally or anything like that, but it just, to me, felt like it really hit on a person who's truly very confused. I think a lot of, you watch his movies and you get so much joy out of him. But I think that other side of Peter Sellers is truly explored in this film, which I think people might really enjoy and maybe be
tráilers.
quite shocked
Visita
at,
mi
quite
canal.
surprised at. There was like this constant longing and almost just this feeling that he was never truly satisfied with anything in his life. Not his career, not in his marriages, that he was constantly on this search somehow. Well, he was brilliant in that he could transform himself completely, and he did it very well. And he didn't just crawl under the skin of a character. He lived in its entire body and made it seem so effortless when you watch him in his films. And just obviously brilliant timing, brilliant comedic timing, and I think the thing that I so thoroughly enjoy when I watch him in films was this almost nothingness and never trying to be funny and never really truly overdoing anything, that everything just kind of happened. In a sense, it always to me felt like the drama of it was always played versus the comedy, and I think that's also why he really struggled towards the end of his career to do serious films, because I think he always took his comedy serious. I think when you read something, when you know somebody's films and then you read a biography or you read a biopic on somebody's life, it's always kind of an eye-opening experience. And he very much had I think people had a constant love-hate relationship with him. He wasn't just always very likable. He had a lot of demons and a lot of skeletons in his closet. And I wasn't really truly aware of all of that. I didn't know that he was as troubled as he was. And the scenes that I have with Jeffrey were written very specifically, and then Stephen Hopkins, the director, spent a lot of time with her, and I got a lot of my information through him. I mean, we would sit down before we would shoot scenes, and he would give me somewhat of a synopsis of how she told the story. We worked more based on the specifics of the scenes that we had versus, because this is not her life story. It's just the part that she spent with Peter. So we worked more specifically on what had truly happened in those situations. I mean, their relationship was so different from every other relationship that he had in the movie, and they had a lot of fun together, and I do think they truly loved each other. But they were very silly together, and they were really different. They were really such an odd couple. I mean, from the get-go, you could have just said this would never ever work. I mean, how could this work? But I think within that, she had a great patience for him and what he needed, because I think he was very demanding on her, and very demanding on a lot of people. We do a scene out of After the Fox where she's in this crazy character outfit and he's in this priest outfit, and they have a good yell scream fest at each other. And Jeffrey and I would just look at each other and go, it's like Halloween all over again every day. So the makeup and wardrobe department has had a lot of fun with us too. We had a lot of footage of Brit with Peter when they were together, and a lot of photographs, and so it was easy in that way to kind of come up with a look for her, because a lot of footage, a lot of stuff to look at and basically just redo. And that stuff's always fun. Always fun to get to do in a movie. Contemporary clothes are so boring, you know? So we get to do it every day, so this is fun.
I was a giant fan of Peter Sellers growing up, but I had no idea that his life involved all this craziness. Literally, it sort of opens up a world of someone we all really hold dear, I think. A lot of people love Peter Sellers, and people are surprised how difficult and dangerous his life was. I guess the film is really about Peter Sellers dead, making a film of his own life the way he wanted it to be, you know. I don't think there's anyone quite like him. I don't think there's anyone who can walk into a film like he used to do and just take it over. He did that with Clouseau, who was supposed to be a tiny bit part in the Pink Panther, and just took over the film, you know. You know, he would attack with great gusto any part he had in a film with full commitment, and was always, I think, scared of playing serious.
I play Anne Sellers, who's Peter Sellers' first wife, and she's really a kind of steady centre in the midst of much craziness. I think the film is in its kind of tone is a crazy tumbling fantasy of how he sees his life, and it reflects the way that he, you know, was always making home video footage of everything, and it's his version of his life as seen on a film set, and this stuff with Anne is almost comes the closest to being very kind of real family drama stuff. She's a very strong woman. She's just, you know, in a marriage that's not working, which she gets out of. But the real Anne, she said when she was with him that she's never laughed so much or cried so much. He was really a trip. And I think we entered the film at the point where it's beginning to deteriorate.
Quitus
I think
tráilers.
really when he
Visita mi
started
canal.
to become a really big star, or started to have ambitions to, you know, just to become the biggest star in England. And she really wanted to be, she didn't want that life, or she liked the life they had. She liked the kind of smaller, more home-based life, and they kind of go their separate ways, really. But it's a bit of a mess because of the children, but I don't think he really was as happy again, maybe, as he was with her. I think at the very end of his life, they found a picture of her in his wallet, and I think he always, throughout the time after he'd left her, would go to her and ask her advice and say, "What do you think I'm doing? Going to do this film or this film? Or I've met this girl. What do you think?" You know, she very much stayed in his life, and she became close with his mother after they'd split. When I first was, my agent said they're doing a movie about Peter Sellers and they want you to play his first wife. She sort of said, "I don't think you're going to want to do it because it's not that much to do," and I wasn't really that interested. And then I read a script and thought, actually, this could be really interesting, just because it's a bit crazed, really, and Jeffrey wrote to me and said, "Please, please, 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 please." And so I said yes. Jeffrey he's a clown. He's a physical actor, and his kind of taking on of the physical persona of Peter Sellers is total. I mean, obviously he's doing all that makeup for hours every day, but he's also his physical imitation of the voice and the way he moves and everything is really pretty precise, I think. And he's very total in his research and his approach and his, there's not a minute of the day when Geoffrey Rush isn't breathing, thinking, talking Peter Sellers.